let's just talk about the system. I mean, the system in general, most people feel is rigged, right? Most people feel is rigged. In fact, there was a very interesting poll that was put out by the Des Moines Register and Bloomberg Politics that asked respondents, do you tend to feel the system works reasonably well for those who work hard to get ahead? Or do you think the system is rigged against all but the very rich and powerful? And the results from this poll were somewhat interesting. 67% of those who identified as Democrats said that the system was rigged, while just 38% of those who identified as Republicans said that the system was rigged. While a full 50% of Republicans polled said that the system works completely fine, while just 21% of Democrats felt the same. Interesting poll, and it brought up the idea, is the system rigged against you? Well, we know for sure that Wall Street is rigged, right? We can start there and say this one should not be a stretch to believe. I mean, according to Reuters, hedge funds and other rapid-fire investors get access to market-moving documents before other users for distributing company filings, giving them a possible edge on the rest of the market, the Wall Street Journal reported, citing two independent studies. That from Reuters. In his best-selling book, Flash Boys, A Wall Street Revolt, author Michael Lewis claimed that the stock market is rigged by high-frequency traders who are able to execute trades in fractions of a second. And then you think about America's banks, how they help themselves to trillions of dollars through their friends and often former co-workers at the privately controlled Federal Reserve. And you know that Wall Street is rigged. Banking is rigged. Banks launder money for terrorists and drug lords and pay minimal consequences, such as fines, which are translated into simple slaps on the hand for these billionaire banksters. Why has no banker gone to jail for their corrosive acts of greed and outright violation of existing federal laws? But if your child is busted with an illegal substance, he could do hard time. And that's especially true if he's poor and he's black. Due to their sheer size, America's largest banks can easily manipulate the markets. 2013, J.P. Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs were sued for conspiring to form a commodity cartel with the mining company Glencore and the London Metals Exchange in order to drive up commodity prices, specifically aluminum prices, by delaying shipments from their warehouses. That is, J.P. Morgan was warehousing aluminum, and then delaying shipments was the accusation, thereby reducing supply. Hardly anybody was surprised when a judge dropped the two massive banks from a lawsuit last year in regard to that whole thing. So we know that Wall Street's rigged. We know that banking is rigged. About Washington, D.C. Is Washington, D.C. rigged? Well, you better believe it. Money buys access and often power in Washington's halls of power. One can imagine that vast amounts of political power coupled with loose congressional immunity guarantees could be a recipe for excess. And men are men, prone to excess and cheating the system for their own gain. Corporate influence has run amok in the Beltway. Political leaders pass laws that are often heavily redacted by the hordes of lobbyists and lawyers employed by major corporate titans in the affected industries. And as compromise reigns supreme in Washington, D.C., who is defending your interests in Washington? Well, the answer depends on a myriad of factors. Your voice matters little, though, if it disagrees with the aim of prevailing corporate interests. And the cost of obtaining the attentive ear of our national policymakers has never been higher. The truth is, current elected political leaders have one overwhelming incentive, and that is re-election. They want to get re-elected. Such short-term aims make it difficult to focus on long-term issues. And even our so-called free trade deals are rigged. Healthy trade relations with other nations is vital in today's globalized economy, but in recent decades, the integrity of America's trade policy has buckled under the explosion of corporate influence in Washington. Ultimately, corporations only care about who is in office at election time, and that's why you keep hearing Donald Trump, when he talks about giving money to the Clintons or giving money to Democrats, prior to running for office as a Republican, he said, I was a businessman and I gave money to anybody who could help me. You see, friends, ultimately corporations are not Democrats or Republicans. They are simply only interested in who is in office at election time. At all other times, they seek access to the power vested within the person. Think of the relationship between corporate lobbyists and Washington policymakers as a game of basketball. Only one person controls the ball at any one time, but everybody else wants the ball. This struggle for the power to control this basketball, in this example, is aimed at no single individual. Instead, whoever has the ball at the moment is the person that everyone else wants access to. But back to the point of trade policy. One example of increasing corporate influence in trade policy here in the United States and in the West in general includes something known as the Investor-State Dispute Settlement Mechanism, which is also known as ISDS. Put very simply, ISDS is an international legal framework that allows multinational corporations to legally challenge government regulations that they deem as prohibitive and or detrimental to their ability to generate profits within a particular country. Now, these rights, which are typically afforded to corporations through international treaties, are completely understandable to a certain extent. I mean, for example, a corporate entity operating in a foreign country should expect to be endued with basic property rights. Now, through ISDS and through this mechanism that's afforded to corporations through the TPP, through TTIP, and through some of these other free trade deals, a corporation operating in a foreign country has recourse if he feels that he is unable to operate in a profitable manner. However, protests against regulations designed to shield the consumer, including laws that monitor the safety of imported baby food, for example, should not be open to debate. Nevertheless, because of ISDS, many different types of issues are up for debate, and many regulations are being chipped away at slowly by multinational corporations. And these regulations, by the way, are designed to protect both the consumer and the investor. Under the TPP, for example, large financial institutions would be able to sue any TPP member government they felt had excessive protective clauses for small investors. Under the ISDS provision, the two parties would be required to testify before an international tribunal, not a U.S. court, an international tribunal composed of 3 arbitrators. One corporate lawyer representing the corporation, or the investor in this case, the second representing the government, or we would say the state in this case, and the third appointed by both parties usually. So is the trade policy under the TPP, TTIP, and other so-called free trade agreements, are they rigged for the benefit of rich corporations and against employees, small investors, and consumers, i.e. you? Well, if you don't have a seat at the bargaining table, then I think you know the answer. This deck is stacked. The economy is rigged. The Wall Street is rigged. Washington is rigged. The banking industry is rigged. Our so-called free trade agreements are rigged. Big oil enjoys subsidies, big banks get bailouts, and many billionaires pay lower effective income tax rates than those earning barely more than minimum wage. In 2015, Oxfam reported that just 62 individuals had the same wealth as 3.6 billion people, which is the bottom half of humanity. This figure is down from 388 individuals as recently as 2010. Now, that number is getting smaller and smaller by the year. 62 individuals have the same wealth as 3.6 billion people, or the bottom half of humanity. Meanwhile, $7.6 trillion of individual wealth, more than the combined GDP of the UK and Germany, is currently held in offshore tax havens. That also according to Oxfam. So call it populist, call it paranoid, whatever you will. It explains the rise of people like Donald Trump. It explains the rise of people like Bernie Sanders in the 2016 presidential election. People see the writing on the wall. You know, the day that it dawns on you that the entire system that surrounds you is broken, your life will begin to improve. When your eyes are open, your vision can guide you through life. But when your eyes are closed to the truth, either through disinterest or through slumber, you're susceptible to deception. And overcoming the financial challenges that stand between you and financial freedom become that much harder.